the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
And thanks for joining us on this edition of Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Lots to talk about today. A couple state lawmakers find themselves at the middle of some controversies. Also, teachers offer suggestions for increasing pay, and new polling data out in the bluest county in the state. And joining us to talk about those issues and a couple other things, our good friends, Libertarian Lindsay Marie, also writer for townhall.com. Lindsay, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
One of my favorite Democrats, just back, shining, glowing new mom, our good friend Lindsay Ship. Lindsay, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And, of course, can't have a panel without our good friend Joey Fox. Joey, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. A very controversial week for a couple of state lawmakers. State Representative Dan Forstall of Indianapolis and, of course, Jim Lucas down in Seymour. Representative Forstall arrested for OWI, also impersonating law enforcement while allegedly reportedly looking for drugs. Meanwhile, State Representative Jim Lucas raised a stir on social media for posting a picture of a newsman making a reference to a serial rapist who just happened to be African American. Once again, controversy. Lindsay, Marie, we'll start with you.
So a lot of this is sort of mocking what's happening at the national scene, or not mocking, but it's sort of the same thing. Politicians are posting things on social media that are getting them into hot water, and whether they intended for that message to be what was received, it is what it is. And so people are trying to call out him, obviously, for what he did. And then on the other hand, we have a politician who's obviously going through something and acting out. And we see that going on nationally as well, sort of a culture of politics that people keep kind of doing these things.
Lindsay, your thoughts?
It is what it is. I'll quote you on that. That's for sure. I try not to get the number one lesson in PR is to not repeat the detractions, if you will, of someone else. So the last thing I wanted to do was to even amplify what Representative Lucas had said or what he had done in past misgivings on Facebook, which has happened often for him. So that's just certainly something that is unfortunate. But I think he feeds off this type of attention. I think many state lawmakers don't realize the intense public scrutiny they're under and feel somewhat removed from that type of conversation that may happen in the Beltway or with our congresspeople. And so it's interesting to see it inspire a public discussion, at least, about our elected officials and what we expect of them. So I'll go with the positive and say that at least we can have a conversation about what we want for our elected officials.
Joey, the controversy surrounding Representatives Lucas and Forstall.
Sure. I think clearly with Representative Forstall, look, I think everybody around the table just hopes that he gets whatever help and assistance that he needs. He has to, pay a debt to society for his actions, but certainly hope that he's going to get healthy. I think on the issue with Representative Lucas, I don't know where in his mind it's ever a good idea to post a picture of a noose, just kind of period. His point that a serial child rapist should probably get the death penalty is well taken, but you can't do this stuff. It's disrespectful. It's going to cause an outrage, and frankly, it then just detracted from the point he was trying to make.
Exactly.
Which I don't know. There are probably some really hardcore, no death penalty folks that might agree, but I think the vast majority of the country would have been right with him on the message he was trying to send. But the one that ended up getting received was not what he intended.
Like I said, just sticking with Jim Lucas before we go to Representative Forstall. Does it surprise anybody or just kind of wonder that in the 21st century, here it is, 2019, social media's been with us for at least a decade now. Anything you put, like Joey said, 90% of the people might actually agree with you, but once again, I think sometimes our elected officials forget that context matters.
Definitely. And I think the thing is, we often look at politicians and we hold them to a different standard, and we should, but they're humans just like everybody else. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to have errors in judgment. And so when we look at, either case really, and we say, I can't believe a politician did this, or I can't believe a politician or elected officials doing this. They are human at the end of the day. As much as we want them to be perfect, they're not going to be. The only thing that we can really do is hold them accountable, especially when we get into that ballot box.
Lindsay?
I think it's it's just a moment where everyone's made that mistake, right? Everyone's made a post or something that they've either been held accountable for by their employer or themselves. And having done both, I don't know if I regret either more than the other, but I think it's a lesson to move forward. And when you have something that poorly phrased, poor choice of words, I try to tell people, just, good Lord, don't post about Nazis. Don't post a noose. That's horrible. Like, let's think about our commentary here. We can get through a societal commentary without using these triggers that are historically some of the worst items that we can choose to talk about.
Well, and I think too that just because you can say something doesn't always mean that you should. Even for politicians who get paid to have opinions on things, we don't always need, and this isn't directly directed just at Representative Lucas, but to many politicians, we do not need your opinion on every single thing.
No, they should just listen to my wife because she tells me that all the time.
Or they should just hire someone to give them their opinion. And
Yeah. Like, you don't have to, honey, I know you have an opinion, but you really don't have to say that. Circling back real quickly to Representative Forstall before we move on. One of the things that I thought was interesting is just sort of the, granted, we all want people to deal with their personal demons in whatever way they can, but just sort of almost sort of the quiet from the political class that happened. We saw the instance with the Attorney General earlier. Folks, Republicans and Democrats, called the Attorney General to step down, resign. Here you have someone who's actually charged with felonies, impersonating law enforcement, OWI. And to a certain degree, we've had none of that discussion has come up publicly. Does that undermine maybe some of the arguments some folks have been making against the Attorney General, or is it apples and something else?
I don't know. It's probably the right course of action for a number of reasons for Representative Forstall to resign, for his party and for the sake of the chamber. However, I think the difference that I see in those two scenarios is that one, pretty clearly, it has been brought about by a medical issue that has been having, and the other one likely was not. So I think that may account for some of the grace, I guess, that Representative Forstall has seen from the kind of the chattering class.
I wouldn't disagree at all. Sobriety is not something that's catch-all. It's not something that one route or course of action will work for the same person the next time, and so it's such a personal recovery that I wouldn't even be in to be able to throw a catch-all as to what should happen for him and for the future of that seat, no matter whether he continues to carry it or someone else. But I do think that there could not be a more toxic situation for a person who's trying to achieve recovery and sobriety than perhaps the legislature. Even perhaps the restaurant industry wouldn't be as toxic as perhaps the legislature. Those two, having worked in both of those industries for decades, I really don't know what could possibly be worse for an individual who's trying to recover. So that being said, I don't have a decision at this point personally as to whether he should move on from the legislature or not. That's for him. That's for Dan to decide. But I do think that I would certainly understand both clarion calls to action from either side. I would understand that completely.
Lindsay, I'll give you the last word on that one.
My thought on this is, as a libertarian, I typically want to make decisions for myself, and I want government out of my life. And this is a perfect example of why, when we put people in government who are making poor decisions in their own lives, and we're letting them make decisions for everyone, then that affects my life and your life and everyone else's. If those are the decisions they're making, whether or not it's be a medical issue or something else, I don't like that. I want to start rating things back to where I have the power to make those decisions for my life and not government. And it's a perfect example of why.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Today we're talking with Libertarian Lindsay Marie, Democrat Lindsay Ships, and Republican Joy Fox about a number of issues that have been in the news as of late. Governor's Commission on teacher pay met this past week as we record this program. Got a couple more meetings down the road on suggestions on how to raise the pay of educators in the state. Some of the suggestions that popped up came anything from basically reducing the amount that the state spends on testing, eliminating the funds for charters, vouchers, and also going back to more traditional, what the teachers say, a predictable pay structure. Joey, let me start with you. Will these hearings result in more pay for teachers?
The only thing that is going to result in more pay for teachers is superintendents and school boards in their negotiation for contracts are going to have to increase those numbers. I'm baffled by this entire process. This is just not how teacher pay. The governor doesn't have anything to do with how much an individual teacher gets paid. He just doesn't. I'm just baffled by this. The state spends well over 50% of every dollar that we have on education. I don't know how we allowed, frankly, this conversation to get to the governor and the legislator level. I think the only thing that can change teacher pay is individual contracts at school districts.
Lindsay, will these hearings result in more and better pay for teachers?
No, I don't think so. Although I know that teachers are in the room fighting for that. Obviously, I think what's more important is that the conversation, yes, it's being had. I don't know if the expectations, I'm with Joey, the expectations for outcomes from this are, for those of us who work in the building often, or at least commenting on it as a routine matter, we don't see anything coming out of this that's going to be substantive and meaningful for teachers. And when you throw a large class size at teachers who are simply trying to make, their days happen for these kids. That's not really a conversation I see having during these meetings. It's very frustrating to see that. I would certainly be thrown in that camp who thinks that voucher dollars are not helping. I don't know if that's necessarily a construct that will have much legs as the conversation goes forward. So I don't know if it's worth, continually repeating that and striking that bell. But no, I don't have any expectations for this. I really don't. I appreciate the governor trying to help, but.
Lindsay Marie, like I said, you spend a lot of your time down in southwestern Indiana. Does anybody think these hearings are going to result in more money for teachers?
No, I don't think anyone across the state does. It's honestly just a dog and pony show at this point. It's not going to make anyone end up looking good. Holcomb at the end of the day is not going to look good because he's not going to be able to achieve what they want. It's a losing battle for him, and with his approval ratings being what they are, why would you take this on right now?
And were I the governor, I think my tack would be a little different. That I would look at the ISTA and say, "You all really sure you want me to take over your pay, take over your school?" I don't think that's what individual teachers want, and certainly not the teachers union. They don't. I don't think that's what they want.
And that's one of the questions is that ever since we started this whole discussion about teacher pay, my question has always been, how can you guarantee more money from the state ends up in the classroom in the pockets of teachers without a mandate from the state government mandating that that's where the money goes?
And that's exactly where these conversations have headed in other states. And so without that framework, even we can't even agree on the framework for this conversation that's happening at the State House regarding teacher pay. So I don't understand how they're going to come to an agreement as to how to do it. It just doesn't make sense.
And if teachers come in asking for a new state mandate, it's good. It'll just. I think everyone's heads will just explode.
It will backfire.
Lindsay?
No, I agree. I think that basically, like I said, it's a losing battle. No one's going to win at this point, and all it's going to do is hurt Holcomb in the long run. I think if I were him, I'd try and squash this as soon as I can or deflect. The more time he spends on this and is photographed at these hearings and meetings, the worse it's going to be.
One of the things that did finally show up, we kind of talked about this in a previous episode of Indiana Issues, was a report by the Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute on teacher pay and state dollars and where it goes. They found out that their research that about 80% on average of the monies that school gets goes towards personnel. And out of that 80%, only 47% is average on actual classroom teachers. Does that undermine the argument about teacher pay when we see that, on a easily 53% of the money that schools get for personnel does not go to a classroom teacher?
Those numbers are hard to work. I mean, it does. There are other costs. I mean, you have huge buildings, right? Somebody has to lead in those places. You have other facilities. I mean, I think it is incumbent upon school boards to force their superintendents to move money down as much as is possible. But it doesn't. I'm not sure that from an argument standpoint, that's an easy one.
I don't buy I don't buy the issue of bloat, the alleged bloat that seems to be insinuated by these numbers at all. You talk to any superintendent, D or R, and they're struggling through the day to make the numbers work for their school corporations, and that's a topic that's frequently brought up at the legislature. I know that we've got one superintendent in the legislature that I always try to listen to when we talk budget numbers, and that's Representative Terry Gooden out of Caruthersville. So I do try to listen very carefully to what he says, and I would do so whether he had D, R, or I behind his name. I really would, because that's an individual who deals with this on a daily basis, and we can see how it really affects kids, and that needs to always be the question: is how does this affect my child in the classroom? I don't have any issue with administrative costs going towards improving the numbers for schools. I just don't. That's part of the game. That's how you run a school.
Lindsay?
I agree that that is how you run a school, but to an extent, when you look at an administrator's pay, it's typically much higher than what you'd expect or what you would think you're getting for your money. When you see school administrators making almost six figures and you're looking at teachers who are making $30,000, that doesn't make sense to me. If you have an issue, teachers aren't getting paid enough, can we start moving some of the money around? Who's getting what, and does that make sense? And then if we are going to start upping the pay, where's that money coming from? Can we take money from something that we would appropriate otherwise? Can we start moving that instead of taxing people and making people pay more for something that they themselves maybe not benefit from?
And certainly in central Indiana, too, with most, I feel like I may have the number wrong, but a ton of these school corporations have done multiple rounds of referenda to increase taxes in their local community for additional spending. I wonder what kind of the taxpayer tolerance is at some point to say, well, we're already spending this much of the state budget on education, then we've raised your local taxes to do it. Well, now we got something else we want. Not that teacher pay isn't important, but at this point, does it become oh God, they want more money, right? Meaning the schools.
And what's that return on investment? I mean, are the kids doing better? Are standardized testing numbers better? If we put this much more into it, what are we really going to get out of it? Is there a direct correlation between that? Because I think some people would argue that just because you have a teacher doesn't mean a student's going to do well. A lot of it has to do with students and what they do when they go home and their parents helping them and them facilitating a certain environment to where they're learning after hours. They're putting in that time and effort, not just sitting in front of a teacher who's doing what they're told to do.
And you are watching Indiana Issues. Our guests are Libertarian Lindsay Marie, Democrat Lindsey Ships, our good friend Republican Joey Fox. Going to take ourselves a quick break. We come back, new polling data out concerning quite some interesting things, and we'll get our panel's perspective. You're watching Indiana Issues. And welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today are Libertarian Lindsay Marie, Democrat Lindsey Ships, and Republican Joey Fox. Well, my friends, recently new polls are out. Our media company, Indy Politics, surveyed 400 likely voters in Indianapolis. The bulk was take a look at the mayor's race, which those numbers we'll get to in just a second, but also maybe take a look at some of the other ancillary issues that were out there. And so one of the first things we did was Mayor Pete Buttigieg, South Bend Mayor, Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. How is he doing in one of the bluest places here in Indiana? And those numbers are up there on the board. Total favorable ratings, 41%. but combined total unfavorable and no opinion is 56%. Lindsay, you put a lot of stuff at townhall.com on the national level. What do these numbers tell you about Pete Buttigieg, particularly in his own backyard?
I mean, it's not good if the people in your own home state don't know who you are at this point in the game, right? I've been saying for months people don't know who he is. He has a little following on Twitter and within certain parts of the DNC, but overall, people just don't know who he is. If the people that live near him don't know who he is, then how is he going to make up that name ID gap when it comes to the coming months? He does have the money to start to make up some of it, but it's completely different than a Biden or, say, a Bernie Sanders who has that name ID. Also, with the favorability ratings, he's not a moderate. He's way more progressive than people want to admit or that he leads on to be. So I think when more people start realizing that, his numbers are start going down as well.
Lindsay, somehow my spider sense tells me you probably have a little bit of a different perspective on this.
I'm a progressive, and I worry he's too moderate. So,
Goodness.
I know, right? So, Pete's numbers are great. I think Liz is doing great work in getting his name ID out there.
Liz is campaign manager.
Forgive me, yes. Yeah. And I think that raising $100,000 a day for 100 days in a row is just spectacular for an up-and-coming presidential candidate. I don't have tea leaves that tell me exactly what's going to happen. None of us do. It would be wonderful to know that Pete's going to be that candidate for the Indiana Democrats, just out of pure allegiance to Indiana. But I think it will end up. Honestly, I think it'll end up being the person who does have the best name ID, the one who can take on President Trump and those, more importantly, the individual that the public believes that can do that. And so whether that translates into dollars and fundraising or name ID, who knows? Probably a conglomeration of all of it. But I think they're doing great work, and I think Pete's on the right track.
But something else I want to bring up here, if I can get Jacob in our studio to bring this up, African Americans and Pete Buttigieg. Seems to almost kind of follow sort of the national narrative that we've seen. Total favorable, 36%, 18% unfavorable. Once again, 46% don't know, no opinion. Joey, does this once again highlight sort of that national narrative out there that Pete Buttigieg has a problem connecting with African Americans, particularly Democrats?
I mean, I don't see how those numbers could be interpreted another way. He does have that issue. I don't pretend to kind of understand the internal Democratic mind, right? On how some of these decisions get made and how these things play out. I think that Mayor Pete has clearly been trying to go into the African American community, go into the churches. And try to make inroads here. I just think it sounds like this is so baked in within that community, this conception of him, that it's just going to take a lot of legwork for him to get over it.
Two things I want to sort of do you folks back to back. One of the things we also looked at was we asked Indianapolis, Marion County, very blue county voters, two things: Governor Eric Holcomb and whether they thought the state was on the right track, wrong track, because this also ties into what we can expect to see in 2020. If you look on the screen here, Governor Holcomb's total favorability rating, 60%, 24% unfavorable, 16% no, don't know. And Jacob, let's go to the next one if we could. Indiana, right track, wrong track, which is something else we asked. Remember, this is Marion County, Indianapolis, very blue, 53% right track, 33% wrong track, 13% no opinion. Lindsay Marie, does this mean that Governor Holcomb, like I said, a Republican governor, this is the bluest of Democratic counties, has got a much easier road to hoe toward re-election in 2020?
Definitely. I mean, but he taxes and he spends like a Democrat, so I'm not surprised the Democrats like him.
I've heard that.
I mean, it's true, though. When you look at the numbers, if you mask the data, you might actually think he was a Democrat by a lot of things that he does. So I'm not surprised that they're not very angry with him. I'm not surprised that he actually is favorable in their eyes. That's good for him going into his re-election campaign.
Lindsay, just when you see these numbers, like I said, as a Democrat for Eric Holcomb, is he going to be tough to beat in 2020?
Eric Holcomb, by nature, being an incumbent, having all of the dollars in the bank that he's got, is naturally going to be a hard force to reckon with. I don't disagree, though, that the numbers aren't. obviously, my first question is, well, what Democrats are we talking to in this poll? Because everyone I've talked to seems to think that the decisions and failures out of the governor's office at State House 206 is indicative of Pence 2.0. So, these, you have to understand, I hear a clarion call of a more progressive Democrat than perhaps the poll was talking to. But I do have to say that, he's got the same numbers that my colleague here was discounting for Pete, for Mayor Pete being 18. I think it was an 18%, didn't have an opinion, no knowledge, and he had a 16% pop for Holcomb. So I think the sword slices both ways on that, and we may have an issue of no name ID with the governor.
But one's running for president of the United States and needs to have some backing versus he's already elected and is trying to get his seat get it again.
Let me get Joe in here real quick. Is this some of the best news that Republicans will ever get out of Marion County?
Yes. Yes, it is. I mean, these are Mitch Daniels level numbers. Look, Mitch is the Republican candidate that has done the best in Marion County in modern history for this. So and Holcomb is so much more. He's his own man. People try to make this, well, he's more like Mitch. He's more like Pence, and he's not. He's like Eric Holcomb. His leadership style is very pragmatic. He's trying to solve problems, which I think is what Hoosiers generally. We always, in whatever campaigns we're running, right? We have to use Hoosier common sense at some point. But he's using it, and I think that's why he's popular across the board.
Let's go ahead, if we could, Jacob, our director, jump over to the numbers in Indianapolis mayor's race as we're getting close on time here. The mayor's race, still a couple of months away. Joe Hogsett, 55%, Jim Merritt, 27%, Libertarian Doug McNaughton, 15%, undecided. No one is, we say, usually most people start paying attention to these things after Labor Day. Lindsay, what does this tell you?
Oh, poor Jim Merritt. Jim sent out a campaign email to supporters this year with the word homicide misspelled. So I question his ability to move forward after a tough summer for him. We all hear that he's working really hard, and I also hear that he can't pay his staff. So I worry about the ability for his campaign to tenure through a struggling portion of time for him where he doesn't have a lot of cash on hand. So I'd like to see, I'm always a favorable. I'm always liking to see a good commentary for an underdog that's a favorable candidate, but I just don't see that here.
Joey, a lot of folks have said, hey, when Greg Ballard ran for mayor in 2007 in Indianapolis, a lot of these numbers were very similar. Bart Peterson had a lot of support, but was like 3 miles wide, but not very deep. And Greg Ballard still won a victory. Is that something that's repeatable here, or we're in a totally different era?
Well, I mean, to the same thing we just did on Eric Holcomb, right? He's not Greg Ballard. He's Jim Merritt. I think that there's a contextual difference here that the poll just can't, because it's based on numbers. That's important. Is that re-elections are about the incumbent. They're not about the challenger. The more that Jim can do, as he's doing, showing the lack of ideas coming out of the mayor's office, right? The lack of leadership that we have under Joe Hogsett. If the election is about murders and potholes, Jim Merritt will win. I think the more the race focuses on the failures of the Hogsett administration, the better Jim is going to do. There's a ton of time left between now and the election, and I don't think that that's necessarily a favorable thing for Mayor Hogsett.
We're almost out of time. Lindsay, I'll give you 30 seconds real quick to throw something out there if you want to.
I would just say if I were the Republicans, I'd be airing that, the Mayor Joe or the Pothole Joe ad over and over and over because it's actually quite effective. And I think it gets people thinking. So they need to be playing that more and more.
Is that point of the program now where we get to our, near the end of the program, we get to our predictions, prognostications. What are our panel looking at? What are they paying attention to? Lindsay Marie, we'll start with you.
So my prediction is that before the end of the summer that we will have a current congressman at the U.S. level go ahead and put his name in the race for the Libertarian presidential candidate.
Wow, that's a scoop there. That's fancy and that's saucy.
I got nothing now.
I know, yeah, I can't compete with that. Well, I'd like to see. I would really like to see Jim Merritt hold Mayor Hogsett more accountable for some of the decisions he has made on especially infrastructure issues. But to be honest with you, I really don't see that happening in a meaningful way. I just don't think that Mayor Hogsett has failed that badly to have this sort of standard bearer campaign where we make it all about potholes. I don't think that will work this time. And to be honest with you, 10 years ago when we were listening to that commentary happen with the Ballard campaign and that win that came out of nowhere, there was a huge statewide issue going on at that time with property taxes that is not here this year. That's not there's not a statewide issue that's got everyone up in arms this year. So,
Really?
yeah.
So much happening. So I'm actually, and I think I may be stealing from myself from the last time I was here too. I'm really watching the council, the council races. I think the council is completely in play, given where the districts are and which candidates and incumbents are actually working and not. These are not big districts. I mean, some of these are like 3,000 voters that turn up. These things can change really quick, and the hard workers are going to be the ones that come out. And I'm not sure it's going to be exactly what everybody thinks.
My prediction: pay attention to a legal dispute between the Indiana State Teachers Union as well as the Dearborn County, a small school district, is trying to break away from ISTA. There was a major legal fight going on. We could have ramifications across the state between ISTA and the school districts that it represents. That will do it for this edition of Indiana Issues. Our panel today has been Libertarian Lindsay Marie, Lindsay Ships, our Democrat, and Republican Joy Fox. Thank you all very much for being with us. Also, thank you to our friends at the downtown studios of Edge Media, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a good day. Bye-bye.